today. So if you could just give a thumbs up, it would be lovely if I could see your faces. You can turn your cameras on. And just make sure that we have everyone here. I'm going to send a quick message to both. I'm not sure if you can hear me. If you can just let me know you can hear me. Got Ritu and someone using year 1. Lovely. We'll just wait a couple of more minutes and then we will begin. Okay. Thank you for letting me know. Okay, fab. All right, so we're going to begin. Thank you for letting me know that you can hear me. So today we're going to be looking at racial equity and inclusion. Next slide, please. I'm just going to check in with my tech. Sorry, our system is a little bit slow. Just bear with us. We're just having a little bit of technical difficulties. Okay, so today we're here to become more familiar with how racism shows up in all its forms and also how to recognize it. We want you to get comfortable discussing race and racism so that we can support our students to have positive discussions and also develop an understanding of how daily microaggressions can affect our students of colour, but also how to support them. We want you to also be able to start recognising racism early on so that we can create a school culture that fosters student well-being. So I want you to pop some things down about what you would like to achieve by the end of this session. So if you have a phone, you can scan it with the QR code there. We've also put the link in the chat box for you. And if you could just click the link and then just be as honest as you can. So what we're going to cover in this session, it's in 4 parts. So the first part's an introduction, which is setting the tone, common limitations when talking about race, non-racist educator versus anti-racist educator. And then part 2 is our keynote speech, where we develop the understanding of racism and its 3 levels. This is also taught to our students as well when we do our workshops, so you are getting exactly the same terminology. Understanding how racism affects a young person's mental health, and understanding what trauma-informed teaching can look like in a classroom. And then part 3 is our first activity, where we're looking at practicing interventions. So we have a pyramid activity where We want you to try and recognize microaggressions and the early signs of racism within the school environment. And then also we're looking at exploring teacher interventions, public interventions versus private interventions, and the pros and cons of both of those. And then we'll have some discussions. And then lastly, part 4 is for our reflections. Hello, welcome.
Sorry.
It's okay. Just give me one sec. Close my door to make sure no one is going to come in. So, terminology that we're going to look at. Thank you for coming in quietly. Just if you could mute your mics. My name is Sophia Sinclair, and I'm the lead facilitator here at Every Future Foundation. So there is a Slido link in the chat box for those of you that have just joined, and we just want you to be honest and pop in what you'd like to get out of this session. So terminology that we're looking at, that you're going to hear me using quite a lot, especially global majority. We tend to use this term rather than ethnic minority or BAME because it's factually accurate. And although in the UK, people of colour are a minority number, in the world, we are a majority. So that means that Black and brown races and countries make up the majority of the population. When we talk about ethnic minority, it makes things a lot smaller. So when we talk about global majority, we recognize the rich history. But we've got some other terms there as well. So we've got white privilege, which is inherent advantages possessed by a white person on the basis of their race in a society characterized by racial inequality and injustice. So it's the privilege of being seen as normal and not having to label yourself using a racial category or skin color. Allyship. So someone who advocates and actively works for the inclusion of marginalized groups or politicized groups in all areas of society. And they're not a member of that group, but they're in solidarity with them. So they work with them and under their leadership rather than leading. So when we're looking at saviorism, that's quite different to allyship. Saviorism puts the marginalized group allyship puts the marginalized group in the driver's seat, whereas saviorism takes the lead and they bring their own opinions of what needs to be done. So what they tend to do is control the group without consulting the individuals of that actual group. And then colorism is some skin shades and this idea of it being more desirable than others, which can lead to real harm in global majority communities, skin bleaching and discrimination as well. Oh, we've got some more people coming in. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Joe. Okay, so we're going to continue. So we're going to look at some, if everyone could please mute their mics. Or if Naz, if you could just mute, I'm just see if I can mute people. Okay. So we're going to look at some common limitations when talking about race. We have got the good person, bad person distinguishes when we're talking about racism. So Dr. Keon West's explanation around racial bias, it's linked to the good person and bad person distinguishes, which is why it's quite difficult for people to admit that they actually have racial bias, because our brain then connects that to being a bad person and rejects that idea because we don't see ourselves as bad people, and then in turn get defensive. So if we can leave that idea at the door, then we can start talking about race and racism and our own bias with a lot more openness and ease. Also, number 2, being afraid to say something wrong. Teachers often feel like they need to know everything about a subject before initiating in a discussion with pupils. So when we're talking about race, it's okay to let the pupils, especially those who have a lived experience, lead that conversation. And then they can also help educate the teachers, but also their other classmates as well. It can also lead to safe spaces where pupils feel comfortable talking about it because the teachers are allowing the students to lead. And then thirdly, I don't see colour. So up until about 5 or 10 years ago, this was the polite approach to take when talking about racism and race. Just pretending that you don't see race and everyone's the same, and you treat everyone equally regardless of race. And we know that this is false. Everyone sees race. And there have been studies that show that children as young as 6 months old notice race. So racial bias actually starts developing between 3 to 5 years old. And of course, this idea of us not seeing colour, it just sets us back, really. It just stunts those conversations when we're talking about race. When I go into workshops, I talk to young people about their experiences. Many of them will tell me that they first had an experience of racism in nursery or reception, and they're clear memories. So with that being said, please ask questions. This is a learning space. It's a shared space for you to ask the questions. I don't want you to feel scared to ask anything or have a fear of getting anything wrong. It's not a judgy, it's not a judgy space. So of course, I'm not going to be judgmental. And I think as well, I don't have all the answers. I'm not an expert. I'm here to facilitate this learning space and also, enable you to have the discussions. So I'm here to learn from you, and may not be able to answer a question, but someone else may be better suited to. So please, if you need to ask something or you're unsure about something, pop your hand up or put it into the chat box. And again, ask for help. So it's fine not to know, or understanding what you want to do but not know the next step. If you need to approach us during the session or after the session, please get in contact via email or just let me know. So we're going to look at the non-racist educator versus the anti-racist educator. And we're going to look at how they compare side by side. So the non-racist educator is afraid of uncomfortable conversations. The anti-racist educator embraces uncomfortable conversations. The non-racist educator watches things as a spectator, whereas the anti-racist educator speaks up or disrupts and takes an active role. The non-racist educator is unaware or in denial of their own biases, and the reverse of that would be being aware of that and also challenging those. The non-racist educator is afraid of teaching social justice, and the anti-racist educator fights for justice in taught and untaught curriculum. We have a non-racist educator that doesn't challenge the school's systematic inequality, and an anti-racist educator actively seeks to dismantle bias systems in schools. So that makes the anti-racist educator part of the solution. There's a great book by Orleen Badu, which is How to Build Your Anti-Racist Classroom. This is an incredible book, and we also had training by Orleen specifically. And I think that this understanding also, it can be applied to any systematic discrimination or bias, racism, sexism, LGBTQ plus discrimination. And it's just about really creating change. So with that being said, your objectives, we are going to get you to write down 3 main objectives that you would like to get out of this session today. And what we're going to do is we're going to revisit them at the end of the session. So I'll just give you a couple of minutes to do that. I'll just give you 1 more minute just to get the last one down if you haven't already. Okay, so we are now going to begin part one. So some definitions of racism by Cambridge Social Studies and the Oxford Dictionary. The belief that some races are better than others, or the unfair treatment of someone because of his or her race, and that is Cambridge. And then the Oxford Dictionary description. Discrimination or prejudice by an individual, community, or institution against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized. So we're going to look at this iceberg, and we're going to use this iceberg as an analogy for racism. Now you can see the top part, which is just peeking out of the water. And this is the racism that we see and hear. Okay, this is called personalized racism. So I want you to imagine this iceberg is racism in the UK. The iceberg underneath the water represents racism that we don't see or hear in society, but it definitely exists, just in a subtle way. And this hidden part, and this creates a society where individuals feel that it's okay to openly discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin or their religion or their race. So have a little think. What kind of racism is more threatening to our society, the top or the bottom? You can please put it in the chat box. Or if you have the emojis, you can put a little arrow up or arrow down. There's no right or wrong answer, as I said before. It's not a judgy space. I'll move my laptop up a little bit because I feel like I'm looking down at everyone. So we've got the bottom. It's really interesting because everyone will kind of think of different ways of how they're more dangerous to society. So the three levels of racism here are personalized racism, institutional racism, and internal racism. And what we're going to do now is introduce them to you and how they operate in society. And as I said before, this is exactly the same way that we teach our students. So there's a complete consistency across the board. So personalized racism. We're going to delve deeper into this now because this can be broken down into two different strands, okay? I want you to think about how this can occur in our schools. So we've got overt racism, and this is obvious and explicit. This is behavior that's clearly racist or harmful due to another person being racist towards someone for their skin color, their ethnicity, or their culture. And this can be racial slurs, racist language, obvious bullying, and hateful opinions about others due to their race. And then we have covert racism. This is very subtle. So this is exclusion from friendship groups. This is little subtle comments about someone's culture, their racial identity, their accent, and these are called microaggressions. The most common and most subtle form of racism is what we call institutional racism. Now, this is racism on a mass scale, and this is due to the way that institutions are run in a country or worldwide. So some examples of this in an educational institution are Black Caribbean children being more likely to be excluded from school than a white child. And then also no or limited literature from global majority authors or main characters, and a lack of diverse role models in the curriculum. We've also got school policies that limit Black pupils wearing their hair in natural hairstyles, in an afro or any cultural styles, or that limit Muslim students wearing hijabs or other religious requirements. We see this currently in France. And of course, we know that this is just huge discrimination. And then lastly, we have internal racism. So this is when Black, Asian, or global majority people start believing the messages and those racist messages that we see everywhere. And they start believing that their culture, their skin color, or their life is worth less than a white person's life. This is highly destructive. It's really, really damaging, and it can cause hopelessness, self-destructive behavior, and it can also lead to self-harm. Some examples of how this can show up in schools are students within the same racial group bullying each other over skin color, hair type, or features. And then global majority students feeling like they're naughtier or less smart than white children. We've also got racial slurs being used as a term of endearment for each other, and other students giving white students or non-global majority students or Black students the N-word pass as well. Gang culture is also internal racism by living up to false negative stereotypes that are presented to young boys and girls in the media. There's this idea that this is, what they're meant to aspire to or what they can aspire to, and nothing more. So we're going to look at this video now. I want you to explain afterwards what you've seen. You can pop it in the chat box. And I want you to keep an eye out for 3 things that keep popping up in the watch.
It all adds up. You can say the words mean nothing when compared to sticks and stones, but in reality, there are some words that break more than bones. Labels force complex people into simple boxes. Protests portrayed as riots. Passion replaced with violence. Black becomes thug. Well, if that's the game we're playing, then let's call your silence by its proper name: compliance.
You can pretend and say you didn't see it, didn't hear it. It isn't yours to fix. It affects some more than others, but the truth is, if it affects one of us, it affects us all. Wait, but skin is just melanin, right? Well, that's true, except sometimes the skin you're in speaks before you, indicates if you're out or in, if this seat at the table is yours. Headline after headline, they say we disturb the peace when we exercise our right to protest, more concerned about peace in the streets than peace for our broken hearts and minds. Stephen Lawrence killed in the street. Breonna Taylor killed in her sleep. We disturb the peace so they can rest in peace.
Aren't your fingers tired of tweeting hashtags that carry names of people whose lives we've lost, but now try to breathe meaning in 280 characters or less? Aren't you tired of sitting on your fence, loud opinions online, but in real life, no comment? Your silence makes you the loudest in the room. How long does it take for a man to die? 8 minutes and 46 seconds if you kneel on his neck, but you can also kill a person's spirit over time. Microaggressions have a cumulative effect, and still, your silence speaks louder.
History has already showed us how the story goes. There's nothing original, no surprises, nothing new down this road. Silence leads to compliance, leads to injustice. Same old.
But together we can forge a new path, one that's built on unity. Empathy is a good place to start, but we also need action. Injustice cannot flourish if there's no one left to uphold it. Let's speak up, stand up, and move forward together.
So if you can pop in the chat box, or you can put your hand up and just let us know what those 3 things were that kept popping up. Oh, I think the YouTube video is still going. So the 3 things that were coming up in the watch. And we've got silence leads to compliance. One of them is safety. Anyone remember any of the other things? Happiness, yeah, happiness. Anyone got the last one? So the last one was belonging. So these are the three, yeah, thank you, Hayley. Belonging. So these, safety, happiness, and belonging, these are the three things that are pivotal for, equality and for us to combat racism. And when young people feel those three things, a sense of safety, a sense of happiness, and a sense of belonging, then, that's where anti-racism can thrive. So we had lots of microaggressions there, and we also had examples of the different types of racism as well. Okay, we're going to move on. So we're going to look at trauma-informed teaching now. So keep these three things in mind when we're talking about microaggressions: happiness, safety, and a sense of belonging. So experiencing microaggressions can lead to a range of negative psychological and emotional effects for global majority students. And some of these include increased stress and anxiety. So a constant exposure to microaggressions can create a heightened state of stress and anxiety. And this then impacts students' overall well-being, but also their ability to focus on their studies and, their homework as well. We've got a lowered self-esteem. So these microaggressions chip away at a student's self-confidence and self-esteem, and then this makes them question their worth and their abilities. Identity challenges. So they may face challenges in developing a positive racial and cultural identity due to the constant invalidation and marginalization that they experience from others. And then lastly, we have emotional distress. So microaggressions can cause so many different feelings and emotions: anger, sadness, frustration, and even depression. And then this negatively impacts a student's emotional health. So we're going to watch a short video about the learning brain versus the survival brain. And as we set this up, I'm just going to talk to you about how relevant this is with young people experiencing daily microaggressions. It's really, really important that you can start to learn the learning brain and the survival brain and be able to recognize it. Thank you, Naz. I think she's just setting that video up for us. Yeah, it's once you recognize it, you may already recognize it, you'll be able to have a trauma-informed classroom and have that safe space for your students.
Hey, welcome back.
Worked previously.
Today, I really wanted to think about what's the best way to teach teachers about trauma without getting them distracted with all the technical stuff, and what's the most important thing for them to understand and learn. And I thought that the best way to do it might be to just make a difference between a learning brain versus a brain in survival mode. So we'll just call it learning brain versus survival brain. And this is the difference. So learning brain is this brain that's open to learning new information, and it's completely okay with ambiguity and grays and vagueness, and it sees the big picture. It like pulls back and is on the balcony, can look over the forest and figure out what's going on. On an emotional level, people in learning brain feel calm, peaceful, maybe a little excited about what they're about to learn, maybe a little playful and having fun too, and definitely curious. And they're not afraid of making mistakes because it's just part of the learning process. And so they're not really thinking about themselves. And they actually feel a little bit of confidence that if they just apply themselves, they might pick up what they're trying to learn. Now, survival brain, on the other hand, is completely different. It's hyper-focused on threat. It doesn't like ambiguity. It wants clear, hard facts. It thinks in black and white terms. It doesn't want anything to be gray at all. And then emotionally, you can imagine that survival brain makes people feel panicky, feel like a little obsessive and afraid of getting things wrong. And they don't feel calm and open to learning new things. They just want to get things over with. And people in survival brain also really don't like making mistakes, and they are afraid of looking stupid too. So students in survival brain don't want to be picked on, they don't want to raise their hand and ask questions and look stupid. And so these people are also filled with doubt about their own ability to learn stuff, and they're afraid that other people can see how stupid they really are. Now it's really important to understand how learning brain and survival brain interact, because survival brain always trumps learning brain. And it makes sense, because survival brain is just trying to save your life. And so if it thinks that there's something dangerous happening, you better pay attention to it, right?
So, as I was saying before, once you recognize learning brain versus survival brain, you will start to see the signs creep up in your classroom. So, it can affect a child's critical thinking skills because they don't want to put their hand up, they're afraid of looking silly or being made fun of. And that survival brain takes over. I've seen it as a teaching assistant working with young students, especially SEN students as well, or children that have had some sort of trauma. And it's just, once you see it, you can then, obviously, like everything else, once you recognize it, you can start to combat it. So we see this with a lot of microaggressions and racism. And we're going to look at what causes the triggering of learning brain and survival brain. It's really interesting that the learning brain is so balanced, and the survival brain is, so all over the place. We have feeling safe amongst the adults present, feeling valued, feeling represented, feeling heard, building of trust over time, and stronger teacher-student relationships when we're looking at learning brain. When we look at survival brain, we have been stereotyped, we have adultification can trigger that, feeling unrepresented or negatively represented by the curriculum, national holidays, cultural days, or a lack of as well. Public discipline or humiliation can trigger it. Racist microaggressions, past trauma leading to a lack of trust in authority figures, biased hair or uniform policies, and also lacking positive role models. So if one of those things triggers the survival brain, and then they are more impacted as time goes on, the longer a student is in survival brain, the more time it takes to come out of it. So students feel best when they feel safe and they're supported by the adults around them. They can't learn if fight, flight, or freeze is always triggered in them. So trauma-informed teaching considers how trauma impacts learning and behavior, and trauma can slow down or completely stop our ability to learn. So young people experiencing trauma are more likely to fall behind in class or get in trouble for behavior issues. So when we're looking at trauma, there are different types. We have historical trauma, which is a form of trauma that impacts entire communities. So this refers to cumulative emotional and psychological damage as a result of group traumatic experiences transmitted across generations within a community. And this is often called generational trauma. And then we have racial trauma. So this is a traumatic event that occurs as a result of witnessing or experiencing racism firsthand. Any type of discrimination or structural prejudice can have a profound effect on the mental health of individuals exposed to these events. So what can we do about it? There are some ways that we can create environments that help a young person build resilience to racial and historical trauma. So one, creating avenues to discuss social injustice. So as students are exposed to the issue of racism through the media, daily experience and history, they need adult guidance to navigate all of this information and all these experiences. There's an increased need for students to have avenues of discussion about things that are happening in the news or on social media. So if you can create those spaces within your classroom to have these discussions about any injustices that are present, whose voice is being well represented and whose voices aren't. And then talking about two sides to every story and then discussing what those sides are. And then secondly, creating a safe space for students to talk. So creating a safe space for students to talk about their experiences of racism or inequality or really anything it gives them almost access to a trusted adult, possibly with similar lived experiences as them. And this really boosts their resilience and also the likelihood of them internalizing negative beliefs about themselves. It also allows them to feel safe in your classroom, regardless of whether you have experienced it. They can feel safe to talk about it there. And then thirdly, embracing uncomfortable conversations. So resilience and resistance to systematic oppression can be increased by creating an environment that acknowledges the role of systematic racism inside and outside of school. And this highlights the need for school staff to embrace conversations around race, equality, and identity. Our own discomfort can't be prioritized over the mental health of the young people within our care. And when students see you challenging your own bias, that also increases trust within that relationship, because they're seeing you also learning and growing and being open and willing to be vulnerable as well. So, have you learned anything new so far? And if so, what? I'm going to just let you know that the link is in the chat box, or if you have your phone, you can just scan that QR code in the corner. Or you can go to slido.com and put the number there that's underneath the hashtag, which is 3585 and then 222, for those of you that might not be able to see the screen. You can go to slido.com and then the hashtag is 3585222. I'm going to see some of these pop up. Yeah, so we've got historical trauma needs to be recognised. Has anyone else learned anything new? Survival brain mode. You can also YouTube that, Google it, and kind of do a bit more research into that if you need to. And if you do need the link, then of course, please watch the rest of the video. Does anyone want to say anything if they can't use the Slido? Okay, we are going to move on. Thank you. Sorry, our screen sharing has been a little bit difficult today. So also want you to keep in mind the things that you wanted to get out of the session. And that would have been written down at the beginning. You've also got 3 objectives as well. So we're looking at our activity now, and this is practicing interventions, where you're going to get to do a little bit of work on our all-port pyramid of hate. So thinking of those 3 things that we saw in the watch in the video, which were happiness, safety, and sense of belonging, I want you to keep those in mind now. We're going to look at this pyramid of hate, and we're going to explain how we can recognize and stop a racist culture early on. So at the bottom of the pyramid there, we have indifference, and we have, sorry, one moment, my screen has just blocked it. So as we get up the pyramid, we have obviously normalized racism at the bottom, and then that gets more and more extreme. So avoiding confrontation, politics don't affect me, saying things like I'm not racist when someone has clearly said something that's racist, not addressing racist comments, and saying things like I don't see color. And then minimization would be things like, is that really racism? You know, questioning someone's experiences of racism, saying things like, why can't we all just get along? Why is everything about race? And this is where the unicorn of the race world comes about, and that's called the race card. The race card is a way of using minimization to just shut down someone's experience or what they're seeing. Veiled racism is victim blaming, racist jokes, tokenism, cultural appropriation, and saying all lives matter in response to Black Lives Matter. And then discrimination is racial profiling, fearing global majority people, stereotyping, anti-immigrant policies, which we're seeing at the moment in the government, and hiring discrimination. And then we have calls for violence, which is hate speech, hate over social media, and right-wing nationalism. Violence is above that, and that's hate crimes and police brutality. And they are in the same vein because you take the uniform off, and when police brutality is happening, it's a hate crime if it is, based around race. And then at the top, we have genocide. So you're going to have 15 minutes to do this next activity. And we've got some scenarios below. So I want you to pick a peer-to-peer scenario. We've also got a staff-to-peer scenario. So just pick one or the other, and I'll go through them. And then we will put the timer on. You have the space to say how you'd respond to the scenario if it happened within your school. Okay, so think about where these will fit, okay, on the pyramid. So if you think number one fits into, I don't know, minimization or something like that, then you would just pop number one and you would write minimization, and vice versa for the rest of them. So you're at an away rugby game with one of your school rugby team. One of your students spots a Black student on the other team, and the student says, "Oh no, he's going to be way faster and stronger than us. We have to watch him." Number two, one of your students sees this term on TikTok, which I'm not going to say aloud because it's a racial slur. And the next day they come into school and make a joke towards a South Asian student and call them that name. Number three, there are two female friends and they're talking in form time. One is of Caribbean descent. She has her hair out in a large afro. The other female friend says, "Oh my gosh, I love your hair," and proceeds to touch the other girl's hair. And then four, you're in a RS class and you are discussing Islam. You're explaining to the class what a hijab is, a religious hair covering, and what a niqab is, a religious face covering. And one of your students says, "Oh, like a ninja." And then I think we're going to go to the staff to peer ones, or staff to staff. So you notice that another staff member regularly mispronounces the names of the Black and Asian students in their class, and also mixes up the identities of these same students. Number six, you're having a one-to-one with a global majority student in your class who's regularly in trouble and disruptive. You ask them what the reason is, why they're so disruptive, and about their behavior. They go on to explain that they're frustrated because they feel stereotyped as being naughty because of their race. They also feel that they have been put in a lower set because of their race, and that all students of colour are in the lower sets where they get less opportunities, and there are more white students in higher sets. Your initial reaction is that this is untrue. However, upon reflection, you realise that Black and Pakistani students are overrepresented in lower sets and white students are overrepresented in higher sets. Number seven, you are a teacher at a secondary school that enforces random bag searches for safety and security reasons. You start to notice that Black students are regularly subject to random bag searches, much more than students of other ethnicities. Number eight, you're a teacher at a school in a diverse area of London. Most of the teaching staff are white, but the majority of the support staff and lunchtime staff are of the global majority. You're in the staff room and one of your colleagues jokes about the lunchtime staff, saying she can't tell any of them apart. So I'm going to give you a bit of time. Pop that into the pyramid where you think they sit. And then we will move on to our discussion. I just wanted to say, if there are a few of you in the room, please do have discussions around your answers, and as a group, choose the staff to peer or the peer-to-peer. We have how long left? We have about 9 minutes left. We may not need that long. We'll see. Okay, if we can start to wrap up, please. We're going to come back to the group. You can, if you're having any discussions, make sure you've got all your answers down as well. Just give you 20 more seconds. Okay, so I hope you all had some good discussions if you could, and if not, got your thinking caps on and managed to kind of work out what some of these scenarios were. We're now going to move on to our discussions. So I'm just, thank you, Naz. So let's look at the answers. Number one would definitely be discrimination or racial profiling. Seeing a Black student and assuming that they're faster and stronger is historically racist. So although it may, the student may not understand that's what they have been kind of almost taught to assume, and they might not even necessarily realize that they're doing it, it is definitely racial profiling. Number two, this is calls for violence because it's use of a racial slur. Now, this term on TikTok has had a massive resurgence. I think it's from the 1970s. And we've seen a lot of students actually use it in schools and not understand that it's racist. Number three, this is difficult because it could be tokenism or it could be veiled racism, because you kind of have this idea of Black people historically being aligned with being non-human or being objectified, especially Black women and girls. We have historical use of Black women's bodies being used for gynecology and training and medical procedures that we use today. But also understanding that there is a real history with Black hair and that people don't necessarily like, you just touching them without their consent. So tokenism in the sense of the idea of people who are of global majority or who are Black, not having agency over their body and that you could just touch it without asking, but also being compared to an object or, an animal. When I do the workshops, I say, I'm not a poodle, so I don't want people to pet my hair. Number four, we are looking at veiled racism here because this is a racist or Islamophobic joke. Obviously, depending on the student and the age of the student, they may just be making a vague comparison and they don't understand. It may be something that they've heard, but it would be a good idea to obviously just point out to them that it can be quite offensive, especially where, we're talking about Islam and someone's religion. Noticing another staff member mispronouncing the names of Black and Asian students in their classes. Depending on their intent, it could be veiled racism or minimization. It can be quite tricky. I know it's hard to learn lots of students' names, but the best way to combat that is for the teacher to actually just learn who their students are. One may be on the swim team, one may be, more advanced at maths. And so just getting to know the students for who they are, not what they look like. Number six. So this is a tricky one again, because of the number of issues. So racial profiling, stereotyping, unconscious bias, or systematic bias could be at play here. Number seven, we've got, again, racial profiling and discrimination. So the random bag searches. And when you'll notice, if you were to notice that this would happen, then of course it may not be a thing of calling it out straight away. It may be a process where you have to observe the situation and raise it to SLT. for example, and take note of what's been happening over a period of time, and then come back with obviously the data. And then we have here number 8, your teacher in a diverse area, and obviously the teacher speaking quite derogatory about the lunchtime staff. This is veiled racism, because it's a racist joke, almost as if people are a homogenous group with no defining features or characteristics. But then it's also discrimination. So when we spoke about what you would do, did anyone pick out any of these? What did you work on? If you could put it in the chat box, or if you can, you're welcome to speak if you have a mic that works as well. Someone's put in the chat. Yeah, it is. It's really interesting looking at all the situations. So what did you get for those? Please give yourself a point, and also have a think about what you would do in your score. It'd be really great to hear some feedback as well. You can put it in the chat box if you want to. Okay, we're going to move on. So responding to racist incidences. So a common mistake that we can have is allowing the intent of the incident to police the effect of the incident that it had on the intended victim or the target. So we have this cycle here, which has the effect, the intent, and then re-traumatization. So when we're looking at microaggressions, they're often not malicious, they're often learned, and they are often from just general stereotyping. But when the perpetrator's feelings aren't prioritized because, you know, they didn't mean to offend, or they didn't realize that that was offensive and they didn't mean to hurt anyone, it's really important that we don't prioritize the it's important that we prioritize the effects that had on the victim, and that then creates a space for them to be heard and share what they felt. When incidences of racism aren't dealt with properly, or the victim is having to prove how or why this is racist, this can result in high levels of re-traumatization for the student. And this then decreases their safety and their sense of belonging. It also decreases the likelihood that they'll report it in the future or seek any type of help because they were shunned. So we have to look at the effect, not necessarily, you know, the intent. So when we're responding to racist incidences, it can be quite tricky, and a lot of teachers don't know what to do in terms of doing this publicly or doing this privately. So if an incident happens in class and you don't deal with it then and there, but then later you deal with it in private, you've got some pros and cons of this, and we're going to look at the pros and cons of both public and private. So the pros of a private intervention is decreasing the embarrassment of the perpetrator and the victim by dealing with it separately, away from everyone else. It can allow more time for the teacher to think about how to deal with the incident. It could be shocking. You may not know how to deal with it. You might have to get some sort of support as well. And then the cons are the whole community doesn't get a chance to learn from the individual's mistake. So there's a missed learning opportunity for the entire class or the group that witnessed it. There's also a decreased sense of belonging for the victim by someone not intervening then and there when it happens. And with a public intervention, so this is an incident happening in class or in the playground, for example, and you deal with it then and there in an open forum. So the pros of this, it can create a community where we're all learning when we make mistakes, and it's it's a great opportunity to learn from them. So this increases the sense of safety amongst the group. It can also allow the whole class to have a learning opportunity and increase a sense of belonging in the victim or target as well. It creates an environment where students of all ethnicities can be allies to one another, and increases the likelihood of bystander interventions. So bystander interventions are young people seeing something happen and then taking action to support and be an ally to that victim. And then the cons of this are the potential to increase the embarrassment of the victim or target and the perpetrator. And then lastly, teachers don't always know how to deal with subtle racist incidences, so they don't necessarily have the confidence to intervene publicly. If you feel confident to do so and you do it in an effective way, this will then increase and also teach the other students how it can be dealt with when you're not around. So some reflections. What can you change? What can you action? I want you to write down some actions that you can take to combat racial inequality in your school. So we're going to split these actions into these 3 categories. So you've got a personal commitment, a collective commitment, and a movement. So when we're looking at a personal commitment, this is something that we can do personally towards our goal. So this could just be self-education of experiences outside your own ethnicity. Read a book, watch a documentary, ask a friend about their experiences, commit to having more open conversations about race with your students, but allow them to lead the conversation. And then a commitment to recognizing your own biases. So you could go and watch a film in another language with subtitles. You could take part in something that is happening, like a cultural event that you don't know of or that you've not heard of before, but is happening in your community. Or in London, there's always things happening here. And then a collective commitment. So what can you do as a group in your school, whether this is as a year group or as a whole school group as well? I would say this would possibly be with your year group and with your SLT, or, you know, within your key stage. Some examples of this are a commitment to celebrate South Asian History Month in your class, a commitment to organising a diversity event for students with everyone in your group pitching in. You could start a book club with a new book each month. And you could also have a commitment to raise awareness of racial microaggressions by hosting an assembly about it. And then thirdly, we have a movement. So what does a larger movement look like, and who do you need to seek support from? So a movement looks at larger change, and this is obviously influenced by those in senior leadership. We also have head teachers and governors as well. So some examples include a movement to diversify the literature within your school. So who do you need approval from? Is this head teachers? Is this head of years? Where would you get the literature, and where would you get the lesson plans? Who would you ask for help? We often find that, of course, schools and teachers want to change things, but of course we have examining bodies and, you know, companies and higher powers that kind of help us or may shackle us in a sense. So if you can start to have these conversations, you could also talk to other schools in your area or in your community and see what they're doing, and that might inspire you as well, or you may be able to team up. So we've got a resource sheet for you, which you can take away. You can put any notes down on it as well that you want to, anything that I've said. And this also includes suggestions for long and short-term goals. We've got some recommended literature for you to continue your education, and also for your school as well. And if there's anything that anyone would like to share in the group, please put it in the chat box. And then anyone that's in this training can also note down those resources. So at the moment, we are in the process of creating some digital formats of our training to be distributed across the UK. So we'd like to know what forms of training you prefer. Please tick all that apply. Your feedback is really, really useful to us. The link is in the chat box, or you could scan the QR code or go on slido.com, and the hashtag again is 3585222. So you've got interactive e-learning modules, reading at your own pace, informational videos, in-person training, lesson plans as well for implementing new learning in your classroom. Whether you would like us to do a podcast or some audio learning that you could listen to, or some learning conferences. Someone's put something in the chat. Yes, so this is actually recorded as well. Are there any specific slides that you would like to share with staff, or is it the training as a whole? Because this is going to go out to you, and then you'll be able to share this training with them. I think it should be fine if there's a couple of the slides. Yeah, the iceberg. Yeah, so what I'll do is I'll speak to Lara and I'll see what she can send out in terms of like a pack with any of these slides that you need. Thank you, Miriam. If there's anything else that anyone needs, please let me know and I will pass it on as well. I just want to say as well, thank you so, so much for your contributions today, your ears and your time. Our Instagram is Every Future Foundation. You can follow us on there. We're always posting and sharing new things and new learnings as well that we're finding. And our website is everyfuturefoundation.co.uk. If you need anything, you can email us at hello@everyfuturefoundation.co.uk. Thank you, Hayley. Thank you, everyone. I'll be around for a couple more minutes if you need to ask any questions. I agree. It's really good to be constantly challenged. I'm really glad that you found it useful. And of course, with the training, you know, we're always learning and growing. So any suggestions, we welcome them. What I'll try to do as well, I'll try to get the slides of the iceberg section, which breaks down racism. And then you can also, you know, pop them up if you need to, laminate them, you can stick them up. Just for them to be, you know, like a visual cue. So that is it, everyone. There's no questions. And I'd just like to say thank you again. And I really hope that this has been informative for you. I'd also say on Netflix, there are so many documentaries and films that you can watch, and they're often sectioned into different cultural areas of the world. And there's also, you know, the Black films and Black history that are sectioned off as well. So I'm currently watching lots of Korean film. Thank you, and hopefully we'll see you again soon. Take care.